She never expected the world to go silent. One moment, there was the sharp crack of small arms fire in the distance, the guttural shouts of men, the thump, thump, thump of rotor blades slicing through the hot, dry air. The next, there was nothing but a high-pitched whine in her ears, and the strange, disorienting sensation of staring up at a sky so blue it hurt. The dust was settling around her in a slow, golden haze. She could feel the coarse grit of the gravel pressing into her back through the fabric of her combat shirt, and a strange, spreading warmth against her thigh that she knew, with a clinical detachment, was her own blood. Her name was Captain Eva Rostova, and she was a long way from the Colorado mountains, where she'd learned to ski before she could properly read. For the last 8 years, that girl had been honed and forged into something else, a soldier, a leader, a surgeon of sorts, but one who operated on the malfunctioning machinery of war-torn villages and fractured alliances. Her specialty was civil affairs, which in the parlance of the global war on terror meant she was the one who walked into a village after the shooting stopped, or sometimes right in the middle of it, to talk to the elders, to assess the needs, to figure out why the boys were throwing rocks instead of going to school. She spoke Dari with a passable accent, and could quote the Quran accurately enough to earn a grudging nod from a mullah. She was good at her job. She had to be. It was the only way to keep people alive. The explosion had been a directional IED, a pressure plate buried in the path they'd walked a dozen times before. It was designed to kill. It had missed its primary mark, the command vehicle, but the secondary blast had caught her as she was pulling one of her interpreters, a young man named Jamal, behind a low wall. She remembered the look of sheer terror on his face, the way he was shouting her name and then the white light and the nothing. Now, the sound was slowly dripping back into her world. It started as a low, oscillating drone and then sharpened into the frantic, overlapping radio chatter. "Contact! IED! IED! North side of the compound! Man down! We need a medic now! Covering fire! Lay down, suppressing fire!" She tried to move, to shout out that she was all right, that she could still function. But her body refused to obey. A sharp, jagged bolt of agony ripped through her hip and leg when she even thought about shifting her weight. And the pain was good, she told herself. Pain meant she was alive. Pain meant the nerves were still working. She forced her eyes to focus, scanning her body. Her left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the trousers shredded and soaked a deep arterial red. Shrapnel, probably from the casing. She couldn't feel her foot. That was less good. The firefight was intensifying. The sharp, percussive blasts of M4s were answered by the frantic, sustained rattle of AK-pattern rifles from the rooftops. They were in a kill zone. Her team was pinned down, and she was lying in the open, a perfect, stationary target. She saw Sergeant First Class Miller, her senior NCO, a bull of a man from Texas, peek around the corner of a mud brick hut. His eyes found her instantly. The look on his face was one she'd never seen before. A raw, the primal fear that wasn't for himself. He made a move to break cover, and she screamed, or tried to. What came out was a weak, rasping shout. "Miller, no! Stay down!" But he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking behind her. A new sound joined the chaos. A deeper, more menacing thud, thud, thud. Not the transport birds, but an MH-60, a Black Hawk configured for direct action. It came in low and fast, kicking up a blinding storm of dust and debris before it even touched the ground. Its door gunners laying down a curtain of devastating fire that silenced the enemy positions with terrifying efficiency. Before the skids had even fully settled, dark shapes were flowing from its open door, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly alien to the frantic chaos around them. They didn't run. They flowed, using every piece of cover, and their weapons scanning, their movements economical and precise. They were SEALs, a Tier 1 asset, probably from DevGru. The cavalry had arrived. Eva watched them through a haze of pain and dust. They were a world apart from her own unit. Her guys were professionals, tough as nails, but they were soldiers. These men were instruments of war, calibrated and lethal. They moved in a coordinated blur, clearing the immediate threat, expanding the perimeter, turning the firefight into a one-sided rout in a matter of seconds. And then, just like that, the immediate danger was gone. The shooting died down to sporadic, distant cracks. One of the dark shapes detached itself from the group and moved directly toward her. He was huge, a mountain of a man in full kit, his face obscured by wraparound sunglasses and a thick coating of dust and camouflage paint. He moved with a deliberate, ground-eating stride, his head constantly moving, assessing, scanning for secondary threats, even as he approached her. This was not a medic who ran headlong into danger. This was danger itself, temporarily repurposed for preservation. He dropped to one knee beside her, his bulk blocking the sun and casting her into a sudden, cool shadow. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at her. Not at her wound, not at her rank, but at her eyes. It was a startlingly direct assessment. He was checking her level of consciousness, her mental state, in that single, penetrating glance. Then his hands moved. They were massive, clad in Nomex flight gloves, but they moved with incredible gentleness and speed. He unsealed her trauma shears in one fluid motion and began to cut away her trousers, exposing the wound. Ava gritted her teeth, bracing for the wave of agony that was sure to follow the manipulation of the torn flesh. But his touch was impossibly light, his movements confident. "Okay," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that seemed utterly detached from the violence that had just occurred. It was a voice you could imagine ordering a coffee with or reading a bedtime story. "Okay, I'm with you now. You're going to be fine. My name's Dan. I'm a corpsman. Just lie still and let me work." He spoke to her as he worked, a steady, low-level monologue that was more for her benefit than his. "Tourniquet going on now. This is going to feel tight, and it's going to hurt. That's the point. Tell me if you feel faint." He applied the tourniquet high on her thigh with practiced ease, the pressure immediate and brutal. The bleeding, which had been a steady, terrifying seep, slowed to a trickle. He then began packing the wound itself with hemostatic gauze, a modern-day version of packing a wound with gunpowder, designed to promote clotting. Through it all, Ava didn't scream. She watched him, focusing on his hands, his calm, professional demeanor. It was a lifeline in the middle of a storm. He had just finished applying a pressure bandage when he paused. He had been checking her pupils with a small pen light, and his eyes flickered down to her chest, to the body armor she wore. On the front, partially obscured by dust and a smear of her own blood, was a unit patch and her name tape. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was something else, hanging from a carabiner on her kit next to her medical pouch. It was a small, worn leather fob, a set of jump wings, but not the standard U.S. Army ones. They were Russian, Soviet-era even, and beside them, a small enameled pin of the VDV, the Russian Airborne Forces. His hands, which had been in constant, purposeful motion, stopped. The silence that followed was more jarring than the gunfire had been. He stared at the pin for a long 3-second eternity. Then his eyes lifted back to hers. This time, the look was different. The clinical assessment was still there, but layered over it was a sharp, searching curiosity. He didn't ask, "Where did you get that?" Or, "What's a U.S. Army captain doing with Russian jump wings?" That would have been a normal question. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a gesture of intense focus, and asked something that no one had ever asked her in the middle of a firefight, or ever. "Your Fallschirmjäger badge," he said, using the German term for paratrooper, a word common in the special operations community. His voice was still calm, but there was a new undertone to it, a genuine human curiosity that seemed wildly out of place. How many jumps you got to earn something like that? The question was so unexpected, so utterly divorced from the immediate life-or-death reality of her situation, that for a moment the pain receded. It was as if he had opened a door to another world, a world where she was not a casualty, not a problem to be solved, but a person with a history, a story. He saw the symbol, and instead of seeing a potential security risk or a bizarre anomaly, he saw a fellow jumper. As he was asking about her experience, Eva blinked, the world swimming back into focus. Her voice was a dry croak. Russian. VDV, combat jumps. 2. Afghanistan, Soviet-Afghan War. Not me, my father. The corpsman, Dan, listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his watch or scan for threats. He just listened, his eyes fixed on her face, his hands now gently holding hers, checking her pulse at the wrist. It was the most profound attention she had ever been paid. My father, she continued, the words coming out in a halting whisper, each one an effort. He was a Soviet paratrooper, fought here, in the 80s, against the Mujahideen. He gave me his badge, before he died. Told me, the sky is the same for everyone, the ground too. When you hit the dirt, you're just a soldier. A flicker of something, recognition, a respect, a shared understanding passed across the SEAL's painted face. He gave a single slow nod. He was right, he said, his voice quiet. The ground doesn't care what flag you're flying. He finished his assessment, his touch returning to the business at hand. He started an IV, the line going in smoothly, the cool fluid a strange relief in her heated veins. He checked the tourniquet, adjusted the pressure bandage. He was a master of his craft, but his questions continued, gentle and probing. You chose this life, he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Following the old man's footsteps, but on the other side. It was an astute observation. It was exactly what she had done. Rejecting the poisoned legacy of a failed empire, but she had taken her father's warrior spirit and his hard-won lessons about the land and its people, and she had offered them to a different cause. She was here, trying to build something, while his war had been about destruction. She tried to nod, but her head felt heavy. My choice, she whispered. He was quiet for a moment, working. Then he spoke again, his voice even lower as if sharing a secret. I did a rotation with some Georgians a few years back. Good soldiers. They still talk about the old Soviet tactics. Some of them, their fathers fought against the Russians. It's a complicated place. He looked at her then, directly. Not many people get it. The layers of it. The history. They see a bad guy with a flag. You see a story. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She felt herself starting to slip, the edges of her vision darkening. She squeezed his hand, a desperate, involuntary grip. Don't let me go under, she pleaded, her voice thick with fear for the first time. He squeezed back, his grip firm and warm. I've got you, he said, his voice a rock. You're not going anywhere, but I need you to stay with me a little longer. Talk to me. Tell me about your father. What was his name? And so, lying in the dirt of a country that had swallowed empires, with the smell of cordite and her own blood in the air, Captain Eva Rostova told a Navy SEAL medic about her father. She told him about a stern, silent man who carried the ghosts of a brutal war in his eyes, a man who taught her to field strip an AK-47 before she was 10, but who also made her read Pushkin and Tolstoy, a man who drank too much and laughed too little, but whose face would soften, just for a moment, when he looked at the same enameled pin that now hung on her kit.